Jake was never the type to take things seriously. A late teen with a goofy smile and a knack for turning any situation into a joke, he was the heart of his small-town social circle. Nestled deep in the woods, Pinewood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and secrets were hard to keep. But beneath the surface of this tight-knit community lurked an ancient legend that few dared to speak of. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Jake and his friends gathered at their usual spot, a secluded clearing in the woods, just a short walk from town. The trees, with their vibrant fall colors, created a picturesque backdrop, but the atmosphere was tense. Mark, Jake's best friend, had brought up the local legend again, a tale they'd all heard growing up, but never taken seriously. "Come on, Mark. You don't actually believe in that shapeshifter crap, do you?" Jake laughed, tossing a pine cone at Mark. Mark dodged it easily, rolling his eyes. "I'm just saying, weird things have been happening lately. People seeing doubles of themselves, strange noises at night. It's creepy." Lisa, Mark's girlfriend, shivered and moved closer to him. "Maybe it's just someone playing pranks. Halloween is coming up, after all." Sarah, the quiet one of the group and Jake's not-so-secret crush, looked thoughtful. "Or maybe there's some truth to it. Every legend starts somewhere, right?" Jake shook his head, grinning. "You guys are hopeless. Let's just enjoy the day, okay?" But as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows began to creep through the forest, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced at Sarah, who seemed to sense it too. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Jake felt a jolt of unease. The next day, Jake tried to put the unsettling feeling behind him. He had a reputation to maintain. After all, the funny guy, the one who never took anything too seriously. But as he went about his usual routine, he couldn't help but notice the odd looks his friends were giving him. At the local diner, where they all worked part-time, Mark pulled Jake aside. "Did you go to the woods last night?" Jake frowned. "No, why?" Mark's face was pale. "Lisa saw you. Or at least, she saw someone who looked exactly like you." Jake's laugh was forced. "Very funny, Mark. Did you put her up to this?" But Mark wasn't smiling. "I'm serious, Jake. She swears it was you." Jake brushed it off, but the seed of doubt was planted. That evening, as he walked home, he saw a figure in the distance. It was him, down to the same clothes and the same carefree stride. The figure turned a corner, and when Jake ran to catch up, it was gone. "Just my imagination," he muttered, trying to convince himself. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. The days that followed were filled with unease. Jake started noticing small, unexplainable things. Items moved in his room, strange messages on his phone. His friends were acting weird too, like they were hiding something. One night, as Jake and Sarah sat on the porch of her house, he decided to confide in her. Do you think there's any chance the legend is real?" Sarah's eyes were wide with concern. "I don't know, Jake, but whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Her words were comforting, but they did little to ease the growing tension. And then the encounter happened. Jake was in his room, getting ready for bed, when he heard a knock on his door. He opened it to find his mother standing there, a strange look in her eyes. "Mom? What's wrong?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes were empty, devoid of the warmth he knew so well. It wasn't his mother. It was the shapeshifter. With a shout, Jake slammed the door and grabbed his baseball bat. When he opened the door again, she was gone. Shaking, he locked all the windows and doors, but sleep eluded him that night. Jake's paranoia began to affect his relationships. He watched his friends closely, looking for any sign that one of them might be the shapeshifter. The atmosphere was tense, and accusations started to fly. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Mark snapped during a heated argument. "You think I'm the shapeshifter?" Jake shook his head, but the doubt was there. "I don't know, Mark. I just don't know who to trust anymore." Sarah tried to keep the peace, but even she was starting to show signs of strain. One evening, she pulled Jake aside and revealed a secret she'd been keeping. "I didn't want to tell you this, but I've seen it too. A few years ago, before I moved here. That's why I left my old town." Jake's mind raced. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to scare you," she whispered. "But now I think it's here." Despite the fear, their shared experience brought them closer. They spent more time together, and their connection deepened. But even as their romance blossomed, the shadow of the shapeshifter loomed over them. Determined to find answers, Jake and his friends decided to investigate the legend. They visited a local historian, Mrs. Thompson, who had lived in Pinewood her entire life. "The shapeshifter is a spirit," she explained. "It takes on the form of those it encounters, feeding on their fear and distrust. The only way to stop it is to confront it directly." Armed with this knowledge, they set out to track the shapeshifter. Their search led them to an old, abandoned cabin deep in the woods. As they approached, the air grew colder, and a sense of dread washed over them. Inside, they found signs of a struggle, broken furniture, claw marks on the walls. And then they heard it. A low, guttural growl, followed by footsteps. The shapeshifter emerged from the shadows, taking on the form of Lisa. "You can't stop me," it hissed. "I'll tear you apart." In the chaos that followed, the shapeshifter revealed its true form, a grotesque, shifting mass of shadows and faces. Jake fought bravely, but the creature was strong. It cornered him, ready to strike. In a desperate move, Jake remembered Mrs. Thompson's advice. He stood his ground, staring into the shapeshifter's eyes. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice steady. The shapeshifter hesitated, its form flickering. Taking advantage of the moment, Jake lunged forward with a makeshift weapon, a silver knife they had found in the cabin. The creature let out a horrifying scream as the blade pierced its flesh. In a flash of blinding light, the shapeshifter disintegrated, leaving Jake gasping for breath. His friends rushed to his side, and together, they made their way back to town. The days that followed were filled with mixed emotions. They had won, but at a cost. Trust had been shattered, and the scars of their ordeal would take time to heal. Jake sat on his porch, staring at the woods. Sarah joined him, her hand slipping into his. "Do you think it's really over?" He sighed, leaning his head against hers. "I hope so. But we'll always have each other, right?" She smiled, her eyes reflecting the setting sun. "Always." As the last light of day faded, Jake knew that their lives had changed forever. The shadows still lurked in the corners of his mind, but with Sarah by his side, he felt a glimmer of hope. And in Pinewood, the legend of the shapeshifter would be passed down, a cautionary tale of trust, fear, and the power of courage. Months later, life in Pinewood returned to a semblance of normalcy. Jake and his friends had moved on, but the memories of that terrifying time remained. They had learned to trust each other again, but the shadow of the shapeshifter was never far from their minds. Jake found himself laughing more often, his goofy personality returning. But there was a new depth to him, a resilience forged in the fires of fear and uncertainty. He and Sarah grew closer, their bond stronger than ever. And as for the shapeshifter, its presence was felt but never seen. The town whispered of its return, but Jake knew they were ready. They had faced their fears and emerged stronger, united by the ordeal. In the end, the legend of the shapeshifter was a reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all and the light that can overcome it.